Eric, this segues into the next piece of research you've done, which is on fat-free mass index. Can you define that term for listeners, and why is this potentially interesting in the assessment of strength and power athletes like football players?
Yeah, so fat-free mass index is basically like BMI, but if you remove their body fat from the equation. So it's all of their fat-free mass divided by their height squared. So fat-free mass in kilograms and then height in meters squared. The reason that it's important, we've kind of already touched on this. A football player needs to be big, needs to be strong, but also needs to be fast and powerful. And so we can look at a position and get a general sense of some of their capacity for physical characteristics, right? So we can look at their height, and we can look at their weight, and we can look at their body fat and kind of triangulate that information generally. You know, I could say, oh, a linebacker is going to be, 6'2", and they're going to be about 220, and they're going to be about 16% body fat or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of inputs to work with. And so in my opinion, when you scale fat-free mass to the individual's frame, essentially, by using their height, you're looking at kind of their capacity for strength and power per the size of their body. And I think that is potentially, if you want to kind of focus in on a single number that can really give you valuable information on someone's football-related physical capacity, I think fat-free mass index is an imperfect but decent solution for that. You know, basically we're looking at someone who needs to generate power, and usually in the context of moving their body or locomotion. So if we can kind of frame their capacity for power in the context of their body size, that's essentially what we're encapsulating with that.
Terrific. And, is there a target that, strength coaches or practitioners should be looking for with that fat-free mass index?
So I can definitely tell you there are different targets for different positions. And that's probably the most obvious thing I've ever said. But, you know what I mean? Like, what we tried to do with the paper is what we looked at a pretty big sample. I mean, 235 college football players with DEXA data. That's pretty good. You know, we're not just saying, hey, pick up some calipers and see what's going on. I mean, that's quite a nice
pretty
sample.
Robust, yeah.
Yeah. And what we were trying to do is we can't really say what ideal is, but we can say what is common based on that sample. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I'm looking at some of the values right now. Like, defensive line is 25, a little bit above 25. Offensive line is just a touch under 25.1 versus 25.2. Defensive backs, we're looking at just a touch under 23. So we know that you want to be toward the higher end. Like, usually a lot of natural bodybuilders try to shoot for like 25, but that's typically at a lower body fat. But what we can do is kind of look at averages and kind of where these athletes tend to fall, plus or minus. And one of the things we do in the paper that we published is we make little box and whisker plots that kind of show the range of, like, here's what a linebacker looks like, and here's what a defensive back looks like. So I think I can't say that there's a single value you want to shoot for, but we had a couple defensive linemen that were actually above 30. Mm-hmm. I'd like to tell you to shoot for that, but I don't think a lot of people have that in them. So we can kind of show what it looks like in high level, pretty successful college football players, and kind of make some inferences about where people might want to be shooting.
Yeah, I like in the paper how you talk about, the value of determining an upper limit of that fat-free mass index, and how, that can help, strength coaches and practitioners as well in terms of how they're going to periodize training or deliver the nutrition. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, to me, that's my favorite thing about the fat-free mass index, is using it as kind of what is a realistic upper limit for. Essentially, the question is, how much muscle can you pack on a given frame? And I think a lot of times that could be used potentially as a recruiting tool. So when you're looking at maybe a slightly undersized player and you're trying to recruit for a college or even at the professional level, trying to look at prospects, if you're like, you know what, the skill set's there and we really believe in this athlete, but we're wondering if we really can pack on the type of weight he's going to need, I think it could be a useful metric in that context. It also alters how you train the individual. So if I've got an individual who is basically as high as I can expect them to be realistically with their fat-free mass index, do I really want to bother training in a bunch of hypertrophy-oriented programming for a person who probably doesn't have much capacity for additional growth? I would say your time is probably best served working more on sport-specific power and power development in general. And then certainly that's going to alter the way they eat as well. If there's low likelihood of adding on additional fat-free mass, certainly the dietitian staff and the nutritionists don't want to keep saying, keep kind of overfeeding as if we're going to be, fueling some kind of muscle growth. And the way I like to think of this is actually with a real example. I doubt that they use this. I'm pretty sure it happened before we actually published this work. So I don't know what went into their decision-making process, but I grew up in Ohio, and I love Ohio State football.
Nice.
And they brought in a kid from kind of down the street from where I grew up. They brought him in as a safety, and he ended his career at Ohio State as a defensive end.
Wow.
Very atypical. So basically, they brought him in as a really, really good state-level strong safety and packed on mass. And it's like, I don't know if we have a safety. I think we have a linebacker now. And then packed
Just
on
kept
enough.
Growing.
Like, I think we actually
incredible.
have a defensive lineman now. And so one of my things is when you're looking at an athlete like that, what kind of a metric can we use to determine if it's feasible to actually say, we recruited you as a corner, but we think you should be a safety, or we brought you in as a safety and we think you should be a linebacker. I think fat-free mass index can be used loosely as a guide to determine how much could we realistically hope to pack on to an athlete without just making them excessively fat. So that's an extreme example, but it's such an incredible example of what a well-tailored strength training and nutrition plan can do for a talented prospect.
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely nice to have an actionable metric like that can really help to inform the practice for the strength and conditioning staff, nutrition staff. And Eric, is there an association with fat-free mass index and performance as of yet?
So fat-free mass index is not new, but it's not often talked about in the literature. It's not frequently published about. Mm-hmm. So we are still missing some of the really basic literature. I mean, I would say that there's quite a nice opening there for some good research to be done. It's like a perfect graduate student type project of this is not an excessively rigorous calculation to make, and there's data everywhere to look into. So I can't say, oh yeah, we did a study with 3,000 athletes and here's the exact kind of relationship between fat-free mass index and performance. What I can tell you is that our study we did involved both Division I and Division II college football players. Division I, for those who aren't very familiar with college football, is the higher level of competition. Yep. Division II is, it's still excellent athletes, excellent teams, but a slightly lower level of competition. And what we did see was that the Division I teams, when compared head-to-head, did have a little bit higher fat-free mass index by about a point. So it doesn't sound like much, but when you consider that there's really only about 2 points separating defensive backs from offensive linemen, a point is a meaningful amount. So I would say that is very basic, indirect evidence that, at least with football, there appears to be an association. Now, I can tell you that we published a study on gymnasts a while back that, we thought that having low body fat might contribute to performance scores in reality, it was lean mass that was contributing to performance scores. The body fat percentage and total fat mass really didn't seem to have much of a correlation with performance. So in that case, I would speculate, certainly, we didn't look into it at the time, but that would probably also relate to a fat-free mass index correlation with performance there, if I were to speculate. So there's all sorts of studies that do look at relationships between lean mass or fat-free mass and performance. But I think kind of a way to refine that relationship is to actually start scaling it to height.